have the elements in hand, and these are referred to as elements or symbols or different things by different churches and different groups. But this is one of the most powerful symbols that Jesus left us. It symbolizes his broken body and his blood that was shed for us. And we talk about what happened on the last night before we partake, usually. And he was a master teacher, but he was faced with ministering to people who were illiterate, uneducated, and they were told all their lives, "Thou shalt not. You cannot do this. You cannot do this." They heard that from the scribes, the Pharisees, the Romans. They were just covered with no and bad news. And Jesus came to tell them yes and give them good news. And he had a short time to communicate that to people because he had a timeline he had to follow. So a lot of times he only had a minute or two with somebody as he moved along. So he was a master at giving them symbols that they could understand and remember by. We talk about all this, but we don't talk about what happened on the beginning of the night that he was betrayed. I like to back up just a little bit and go through the whole night, because he called the disciples to come to the upper room. We don't know where they came from. We don't know if they took a shower and got dressed and came to dinner. We don't know. But we do know they had to walk through the streets, and those streets were nasty. There was mud, there was trash, garbage, animal waste, stuff you don't want to walk on. But that was the only choice they had. And they either had sandals or were barefooted, and they had to walk through that to get to the upper room. And it was typical then for a slave or a servant to wash a guest's feet when they came into a room, because they were dirty. They had picked up all that trash and garbage in their contact with the world as they came to a house. So somebody would clean it for them. And that night, Jesus did that. I've heard people say that he was just showing them how to have a servant's heart, that he was just demonstrating that. But I think there was a lot more to that. This man was God. He was the very God that John talks about in the beginning of his book, that created everything. Everything was created by him, and there was nothing created except by him. This is the God of heaven who is entitled to sit on the throne and wear robes that are so glorious we couldn't even look at them. And what he had done that the disciples didn't realize at the time was he had taken off those heavenly robes and clothed himself in flesh. He had incarnated himself in flesh. They didn't understand that at that time. So what he did before they had the meal was he washed their feet. And the way he did that was he took off the robes, whatever he normally wore. I don't know if he had on a rabbi's robes or what, but he took off his clothes and wrapped a towel around his body. And then he took a basin of water and he knelt down and he washed each one of them's feet. He got the dirt off of their feet with the water, and it came onto the towel that was wrapped around him. That shows you what he was doing for us, about to do for us at that time. His body was going to take the sin that we had accumulated in our transmission through the world as we walk through the streets. We pick up sin and garbage, and he was showing us that he could remove that with his blood, the water, and his body, the towel. And it's just such a wonderful picture. I always try to go through that before I do the communion, before I think about it. But that night he took the bread and the cup. On the night he was betrayed, he took the bread, and when he'd given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And I like, you don't have to do this, but I like to take the bread and actually break it before I partake. But you don't have to do that, but let's all partake of the bread together now. In the same way, he also took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is a new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." So let's drink the cup.